let's try to hold off. But we will continue to monitor this Kevin Durant situation as it probably will continue to go for the summer. And we'll move on to other things that we're continuing to monitor too. And that is Zion Williamson, who people have been monitoring for, at this point, 2 years now, for him to get back on the court. But New Orleans has a big decision to make. Before they can even think about making a decision for Kevin Durant, they have to decide what they're going to do with their top pick and Zion Williamson, who is eligible for a max contract extension this summer. So simple question to y'all. Matt alluded to it in your video. So I'm going to let Matt go first to get it out. Should Zion Williamson get that max contract extension from the New Orleans Pelicans?
What I said the other day is that he shouldn't get it, but you have to give it. And I stand by that.
Because why shouldn't he get it?
It's so risky, but it's also way too risky not to. Because if you look at a team like New Orleans, there's the rumors that Zion wants out of New Orleans have already come up, which is really bad when you just look at the Anthony Davis left after one contract. And you need to have stars stay in New Orleans. Chris Paul was only there for 4 or 5 years before he got traded to the Clippers. He was a little longer than that, but no, it's 5 years. And it's just, they need a franchise standard bearer, but someone with Zion's injury history, it's so risky. And it's not just the injury history, it's the body type. It's such a bizarre body type. And one of the reasons why he's so good is because of his ferociousness with his body, which just leads to more injury-prone situations. So I think it's something that you're just kind of forced into doing, and I wouldn't call it a bad move, but if you're just looking at it as a math problem, it's the wrong move.
I hear you, and to clarify, Zion Williamson did get the max contract extension. 5 years, $193 million. Could end up being around 203 or something like that.
It might be up to 230, depending on that. It's a bunch.
It's similar to Jaws. It's similar to Jaws' contract, where it can hit up to
the same
220, 230. My question is, do you think he should have gotten it? Would you have given that to him? So let me just clarify that a little bit. But no, Matt, I hear what you're saying. The risk out, there's a big risk to it, but in the NBA, in professional sports, man, if you have that number one pick, if you have that high upside, as a GM, you can't justify not swinging for that. If you're a team like New Orleans Pelicans, this is the realization of moves you made 3 years ago, right? You traded Anthony Davis. You put him on a minutes restriction to say that we're going to trade him. You acquire all these assets for him. You stink, you're bad, and you go and get the number one overall pick. And we have yet to see Zion really operate for a full season. Yes, that's injury, but the last quote-unquote full season he played was 2020 in that shortened season, 61 games played, 27 points per game, 7 rebounds on 61% from the field. And an all-star.
Incredible. Unbelievably great numbers.
I cannot trade that. I can't let that walk. I have to sign that because that's box office. And the other side of signing somebody is the business side. And the business side says that Zion Williamson puts asses in seats. And for a team like the New Orleans Pelicans, that's not a given. If anything, that's an uphill battle. Almost on a nightly basis. But that's a fan base that can't wait to cheer for something good again. If you remember the last time Anthony Davis had them in the playoffs, 2017, and 18, yeah. They got 18. They got swept by the Warriors, if I remember correctly. But all of them close games. Even one of them went to overtime. So competitive games, good games, and I remember that stadium was rocking. They were loving that.
And they beat the Blazers, right? They beat the Blazers.
You're thinking they lost to the Warriors in the playoffs in 2015. That's when they got swept. And in 2018, they lost in 5. and they swept the Blazers in the first round in 2018.
To get to that point.
Right.
Right. So if you remember that fan base, that city in that time, they loved it. It was a ruckus center. I'm like, I don't ever remember Smoothie King getting like this. That's a fan base. That's
Sorry,
a fan base
I hate that stadium name. That's
Smoothie King. I
Smoothie
know, it's
King.
hilarious.
the worst stadium name in all of
crazy.
sports.
But to me, that's a fan base that's ready to cheer on something again. And if you give them something, if you 27-7 on 61% from the field in your second year, absolutely you get that boy that money. Absolutely. And he's not the driver of the team anymore. I think the CJ McCollum move is great for Zion Williamson because he's not the voice of the team. He doesn't have to worry about everybody else along with himself. CJ will worry about everybody else. Zion, you go worry about yourself. I'll make sure that the team's direction stays aligned as the veteran statesman. I think it's a great move.
I do love them bringing in vets to kind of surround Zion and also just building out the team. So, like, you know, if something does happen to Zion, maybe we won't win a title, but we'll still be relatively okay if we can get, flip him or get assets for him, whatever the worst case scenario is. My main thing with Zion, and I am a massive fan of his talent and who he is as a player. I think that when he's on the court, you could put him up there in the top 10 of the NBA just because he has an unstoppability factor to his game. When he is going, not a ton you can do with it. Look, I watched the Summer League last night. Kenny Lofton Jr.'s son is about 300 pounds, built like Zion, and was unstoppable. Unstoppable because of his size and his agility at that size. So a lot of those same qualities are multiplied in Zion, obviously, to a much higher degree. But, like, looking back through the history of top picks that, the big question comes up. They've been injured, and the question is, do you max them? Do you not max them? Embiid is a guy who was like that. He got 5 years, $147 million. You would say it's ended up pretty well. He's MVP candidate, but there's been a lot of times where he has not been available at the end of the year.
Absolutely. Like, you don't have to question whether that's worth it. It's no question. 100%.
Another
guy who maybe you do question just because of how it turned out, Kristaps Porzingis, still battles injuries and ended up not just... And I think it's maybe the injuries made it this way, but I don't think he's the player we all thought he was initially in the first couple of years.
Because there's some months where I'm like, oh, that boy might have earned his contract. And then the next month, he shows me that he didn't.
Well, in my opinion, he is like what I think fans hope Chet Walker becomes, is what we thought he was. Chet Holmgren. Chet Holmgren. I'm sorry. Is a guy who is like almost like this 7-foot KD unicorn type, and he's really just not. He's a shooter. He's a 7-foot stretch four. Anyways, he got 5 years, $158 million because he was an all-star. Kyrie Irving maxed out at the time. Remember, Duke and in the NBA, big-time injuries. 5 years, $94 million. They end up winning a championship with him. Well, obviously, big help from LeBron. Blake Griffin is the last guy on our list. Again, he was instrumental in getting the Clippers to the heights they got to. But when they got to those heights, he would exit stage left with an injury sometimes. So ultimately, when you look at the big guys who we mentioned, Blake Griffin, Embiid, Porzingis, varying degrees of success, even at their best, what befalls them is the unavoidable fact that the most important games and the games that you are judged on happen at the end of the season after you've played 82 games.
It's tough.
And when you're a guy as big as Zion, I really worry, and as explosive as Zion is, I really worry about his durability. But again, I say all this to say you had no choice.
You had no choice. Because you're New Orleans. You are not like you are the New Orleans Pelicans. Some self-awareness has to go in with this too. Who are we to let Zion Williamson walk? Are you kidding me? Like Adam Silver might actually step in and be like, yo, like y'all need to turn a profit.
Giving him $230 million.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'll pay for it if you need to. But of that list, I think the most comparable is Blake Griffin. Because you look at it, he missed his entire actual rookie season with the injury, and then came back the next season and won Rookie of the Year, won a slam dunk contest, was an all-star, and then ended up blossoming into being the star in the league. And when he did that, his game also progressed. That's something that everyone's looking for Zion too, is when he gets healthy, how will his game progress? Blake Griffin, remember, like Zion, could only dunk the ball. And then by the all-star level of Blake Griffin, this man was dribbling it 94 feet behind his back, doing no-look passes, pulling up from three, between the legs. Like, the game progressed exponentially once he showed those little signs of health. And I think Zion Williamson can do that. It's just about getting him on the floor, getting him the right regimen, and allowing that stamina to build up. Because what also hurts you with an injury is you never allow your body to get through those games, to show your body that we can do it. You always hit a 40-game wall, so your body thinks to the next 40 games, we're going to have to bow out. Once you finally put that first 75-game season together, 70-game season together, and you're like, whoa, like, hey, we can do this. I know how to pace myself. I know how to knock an injury. I know how to make it through the season so that I'm most impactful in those playoff games, in those postseason games. But if I'm just looking at the start of the careers, who got it from the injury, I'm likening it to Blake Griffin, and that further just drives my point home of New Orleans, you had no choice. You were fooling yourself if you thought this was a debate, but you had no choice. You had to pay that man.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm less enthusiastic, agree, but I think Zion is the modern day Barkley if he can stay healthy. I think his game magic. I really think he's that talented. I'm really pessimistic about his health, but I agree. You do have to do the contract.
I get it. And for a 6'8", I'll be generous. 230, 240.
Real generous. That's really generous.
250. I'll be generous. For a 6'8", 250 guy, he's got the worst injury. Them knees. I'd almost, knee or ankle is the worst thing you could have for a guy who bends the floor when he jumps off of it. That's the worst thing you could have. So I understand the apprehension, Matt. But then I come back with you, 60 games played, 27-7 on 61% from the field. When's the last time New Orleans saw that?
Yeah,
Anthony Davis.
Right, never.
Anthony Davis.
I'll say, you make the Charles Barkley point. I'll call him Little Shaq because the brutality that he exhibits in the paint, it is so rare. And that's why you do it. And also, last point here for me, I think that gives you even more incentive because now you have Zion maxed and we think that his shelf life may not be too long. Now it gives you even more incentive to go empty out the war chest for Kevin Durant and really push your time frame forward.
Well, okay. So if they empty out the chest, if they try to go get Kevin Durant, the first person who Sean Marks is going to ask for, and the money works. And Jake, the money works perfectly.
But you're never giving up.
No, you're not. I'm sorry. They asked us for Devin Booker. He's going to ask for Zion. That's what he's going to do. Like, he had the gall to ask us for Devin Booker. So
they asked, but I would.
It's a formality. I mean, if you shoot for the moon, you're going to land amongst the stars. So we're going to start up here, and then when they knock us down to, it's still going to be a high point. So that's who they're going to ask for. So if you're in New Orleans and you do go and get Kevin Durant and you surround yourself Kevin Durant with Zion Williamson and CJ McCollum, now you're looking at a team who's going to knock on the door in the West. Very much going to knock on the door in the West. But is that what you're willing to sell it for? That big threes, that's what you're willing to sell it for.
No, right. I don't think, right. A big three of McCollum, Zion, and KD, I'd give a lot for. I'd do a lot for that. Of KD, BI, and...
No, I was thinking... BI would go. I was thinking they'd ask for Zion. You'd say no. You end up sending BI and company.
Oh, I would say... I would. Yeah, I would.
Yeah,
I would.
Doing that. Yeah, that skyrockets you to the top of the Western Conference. Yeah. For sure. But